Thanks for tuning in to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. We really appreciate you joining us today because there's so many things that 2019 is giving us that are really interesting to talk about. One of them is more cover crops as a main crop than we've ever seen, where we've got prevent plant acres all over the country, and guys are putting in cover crops. We think that's a great idea. We'll talk about some of the things you need to know with cover crops.
Well, as it is getting later in the season, it's the last chance you've got now to get some spraying done before flowering in soybeans. We're going to talk about how important that is today.
We've also got a difficult to control weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop this weed a little bit later in the show. But first, here's our farm basics.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the system that makes the difference. Because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
During our farm basics time today, we're going to talk a little about insects around your house, around your yard, and around you. So for Darren and me, we've been doing the Ag PhD TV show for about 21 years now, and we film outdoors primarily. Well, today is one of the worst gnat days we've ever had. We're just spending our time swatting them away. So we want to talk about how to get rid of some of these insects so you don't have to spend all your time swatting at bugs.
All right, first of all, everybody looks at bug spray and thinks, hey, I'm going camping, I'm going to be outdoors, I'm going to have some bug spray and keep mosquitoes off. And it does work pretty well if you've got some DEET to keep mosquitoes off, and there are other recipes that people use as well. One that we found that works pretty well for gnats is a mix of vanilla and vinegar. And it sounds weird and it sounds like it doesn't smell the best, but it actually works pretty well on gnats. Now, nothing's perfect on gnats. They seem to be one of those bugs that just comes no matter what. But that would be our mix of choice. If only we had some today, it'd be great.
The other thing that we've done pretty commonly is when we're out wearing caps, we'll throw little dryer sheets. So like Bounce or whatever brand you use, throw a dryer sheet or a few of them in there, and that for some reason seems to keep the gnats away too. The pesticides that we commonly use to kill a lot of insects, like for example around your house or around your yard, we suggest using Tempo. Well, that's made from the chrysanthemum flower. So it's like sprinkling a flower around your house and your yard. And by the way, that Tempo is labeled for use in your house. So I'm just trying to say here, yes, pesticides are dangerous to some degree, but everything is dangerous to some degree. Just always use caution with everything.
You know, the other thing with any kind of insect, now today we're dealing with some gnats flying around, and this may not pertain to them quite as much, but when you have insect problems, a lot of times you have to look at, well, what are they going after? And if you can get rid of their food source or their breeding area, well, that really helps things. Like with mosquitoes, for example, if you have standing water sitting in an old tire that's laying around or something like that, that is a spot where they can breed. So if we can get those things away from where we want to play during the summer and have our kids outside, that's a good way to keep mosquitoes down and other bugs as well.
Yeah, and the big thing that a lot of people forget is it's not just that insects are annoying, it's that they carry disease. And when you get disease entered into your body, even if you are a relatively healthy person, it can take you out for a week or two. And especially if it's a child or maybe an elderly person, that might knock them out for a month or two. So we've got to do everything we can to get harmful insects under control, especially around where we're going to be, like our house and our yard.
Well, stopping annoying insects is certainly important for your comfort, but stopping weeds is really important for you to make profit in your fields. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.
Avoid dry run failures with the new Hi-Pro Force Field pump. Providing the ultimate protection, this wet seal pump will save you on costly in-season downtime to keep your sprayer running. Now all you have to worry about is the weather. Hi-Pro, helping you spray better.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
With the success of the Case IH Steiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why Case IH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us, because Case IH offered the first 5-axle design to give you more power to the ground, with less berming and compaction, all to help you be more productive. Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
At Estes Performance Concaves, we know how valuable your time is at harvest. That's why we designed the new XPR concave system. The XPR system is the #1 performance concave system on the market, surpassing the rest in both speed and efficiency, ensuring every last grain from your field gets into your tank. Plus, XPR concaves work for all row crops. No more changing concaves, meaning you have less downtime. Take back your bushels this harvest. Get Estes Performance Concaves in your combine today.
Are you looking for an easy way to apply dry powdered products to your stored grain? Do you want to use the applicator recommended by industry leaders for products like Diacon D and other dry powder products? Changing Time CT applicators successfully apply a diversity of products quickly, easily, and accurately. The innovative CT applicators are designed to give you the most accurate application of products such as talc, inoculants, fertilizers, and other dry products. For commercial use or on the farm, you need the applicator industry leaders are using. CT applicators for the changing times.
Cover crops have grown tremendously in popularity here over the last few years. Today we're going to talk about some of the benefits, some of the drawbacks, and also what different blends or exactly which specific crops should you plant on your farm.
With cover crops, there's a lot of things that you've got to keep in mind, and one of them for me is going to be the rotation. It's the most important thing that we're trying to do here is keep our soil healthy, keep our soil life thriving out in our fields, and protect that soil so that the next time we want to raise a crop, that we can raise a successful one. Now you look at a lot of the farmers that are in a prevent plant situation, maybe that involves some acres on your farm this year. If you've got ground that you're going to leave idle and just leave black all throughout the season, you're really subject to erosion, to losing some of that soil to wind or to water, and you're also subject to microbial life going down in your fields. Like take, for example, phosphorus uptake. A lot of times we'll see this fallow syndrome when we've got the ground not farmed for a year before we plant. Well, what that is it's mycorrhizae fungi that are in the soil actually dying off because they don't have a food source or a host plant to be able to thrive and stay around in your soil. That's where a cover crop comes in. When you're picking a blend, one of the things I'm going to look at is improving soil health and keeping your microbial life going for the next season.
All right, so speaking about that microbial life, mycorrhiza fungi is not supported by crops like radishes, kale, rapeseed, so you've got to be a little bit careful what you're doing for a cover crop blend. Now it's pretty simple really. What our suggestion is always get a grass crop out there, something like a rye or oats. That's what a lot of people in our area are doing this summer, is throwing some oats out and then throwing a little bit of radish along with it. It's no big deal to have a crop that doesn't support mycorrhiza fungi as long as you do have some crop that does support it. So what a lot of people are doing is, let's say 90% oats, 10% radishes. The oats are nice because not only can they help you build soil organic matter and reduce erosion, but also it's a grass crop and it will pull out a lot of nutrients in your soil, like for example nitrogen. And you might think, well, why would I want to pull nitrogen out of my soil? Here's the concern. If you leave that ground black, like Darren was talking about, let's say you've got 5% organic matter soil. Over the course of this summer, you're going to have 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen that are going to come available. Well, wouldn't it be nice to pull some of that up in the oats, and then as the oats decays over the course of the next year, then that nitrogen, some of that comes back to you. Otherwise, what could happen is if you continue to get lots of rain this summer, that nitrogen that your soil provides all of a sudden leaches away. So that can be a real problem. I like having the radishes out there to help bust up a little bit of soil compaction. That's the #1 reason why we talk about radishes and turnips in a cover crop mix.
Now you may be saying, look, I never plant turnips and radishes. I really don't know anything about those crops. Well, that is a little bit of an area of concern. And one of my biggest concerns with cover crops is that we get planting this blend of things that we've never planted before. So make sure that you're asking your agronomist or your seed provider, all right, how do I kill these things next year so they don't stick around for my crop? And be really careful If there's some crops that you just don't want to go to seed, that's one good way to avoid a problem for next year with an annual crop. Or if you've got a winter annual, hey, here's one I'm gonna burn down in the fall before I get into the winter, or I have to be ready to do a burn down very early in the spring to prevent a lot of moisture loss for my crop going into the season. So you gotta be prepared for those kinds of things and know what blend you're planting.
So for example, in our area, there's a lot of problem controlling clover. Also a lot of problem controlling canola based on the crops that are raised in our area. So why would I throw clover out in this cover crop or canola? I don't want to do that. Vetch is another thing that a lot of times I'll tell people, well, you may not be able to control that the best with your particular rotation, so maybe avoid that as a cover crop. That's where I kind of like the oats and the radish or turnip thing. I can kill those just about any crop that we're going to raise around here. The other thing I would encourage you to consider is usually we talk about, yeah, it's nice to have a legume out there, produce some nitrogen for next year's crop. But let's say that I do have a prevent plant situation. I planted soybeans last year. I'd like to plant soybeans again maybe next year, and I have a lot of soybean cyst nematode in my area. Well, why would I want to put out a host for soybean cyst nematode? Many of the legumes and in the bean family, they can host soybean cyst nematode. So in effect, I haven't really broken my rotation like I would kind of like to. So that's one of the reasons, like on our farm, if I'm going to raise any cover crop now going into next year, I'm probably not going to throw a bean out there because I'm much more concerned about soybean cyst nematode than I was 10 or 20 years ago.
Now the other thing is, if you aren't used to planting cover crops, you got to be smart about this. If you're planting quite a few acres on your farm to cover crops and you say, well, I hear all these other guys are just waiting and they're planting into green cover crop next spring, maybe that's what I'll try. If you've never done it before, do your homework on this because it's not easy, and it's not like all the guys that are using cover crops regularly got it right the first time. Talk to some other farmers who have been doing cover crops in your area for a long period of time, and if nobody's been doing cover crops in your area, well, talk to somebody from another area of the country and find out, okay, what are you doing? What kind of equipment are you set up with to be able to handle this if I'm going to plant green? Or maybe you'll get advice of, hey, you need to burn that down in the fall. Okay, when is the best time to do that? Because it's going to vary depending on the blend that you're planting. And again, like Brian said, the crop rotation that you're going to be in on your farm.
Yeah, there are a lot of benefits to cover crops. We really encourage you to look at cover crops, especially in a prevent plant situation, or if after harvest in the fall, you've got at least 60 days before freeze up. Cover crops really can be great, but there are also disadvantages like Darren was talking about. You can create more weeds for the spring. You also could have soil that's too dry or too wet in the spring, so you may need to terminate that cover crop in the fall. Lots of different things for you to consider, but again, take a hard look at cover crops this summer.
And one cover crop you do not want to plant is our weed of the week. We'll show you what it is coming up later in the show.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the system that makes the difference. Because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
When it comes to spraying herbicide, the number one thing we always want to consider is not just the weed control, it's the damage to the crop. Well, in soybeans are much more sensitive to crop injury once they begin to flower. With indeterminate soybeans like we have in the northern United States, they're going to begin flowering shortly after the longest day of the year, which is June 21st. So in other words, if you haven't seen flowering on your farm yet, you're going to in the very near future.
Now there are a lot of things here as those flowers start. As Brian mentioned, it's such a sensitive time for those plants. We know that we can impact yield at this point if we hurt the plant. So we've got to be really cautious. And when you think about that, you're probably thinking about the PPO type products like a FlexStar, Ultra Blazer, or Cobra. Those are the products that tend to show up on the leaves the most, as if they're damaging the plants. But please don't think, well, I can just spray anything out there. I can spray Roundup on Roundup Ready soybeans, or Liberty on Liberty Link soybeans, or other herbicide tolerant options. Maybe that's not the best idea, even if you have products that are labeled to be sprayed after that, because you are still going to stress the plant. The plant is going to have to work through that herbicide. Even if it's tolerant to it, it's still going to have to expend energy right during a time where it should be putting out blooms and starting to make some pods.
What Darren's getting at here is ideally we'd love to have you finish all your herbicide spraying by the time the beans start to flower. We realize we don't live in a perfect world, we don't farm in a perfect world, and sometimes you have a whole bunch of weeds that come later on. Well, look, if the weeds are going to hurt you 10 bushels and the herbicide's going to hurt you a half bushel, let's say, I'm going to kill the weeds rather than worry about any potential injury to my crop. But the big thing that we wanted to stress to you today is, especially if you have some harsher herbicides, like Darren mentioned the PPOs, and especially I'd say Cobra, get that done now. The other great thing about spraying Cobra right now, for example, is Cobra is an absolute white mold suppressor. In fact, it's just about as good as the best fungicides on the market today. So if you go out there, even with a half rate of Cobra, like 6 ounces, right before flowering, you should have pretty good control of white mold. You only spent about $5 to $7 an acre, and you also have some weed control with that too. So again, we'd really like to see those PPOs sprayed early. Now, Darren mentioned FlexStar. I don't just look at that as crop injury, I look at that as carryover too. Don't forget that the rotation restriction to corn with FlexStar is 10 months. So if you're going to spray June 20th, for example, that means you can't plant corn until April 20th next year. So we're right about to the end for spraying Cobra, FlexStar, and any of the PPOs.
And as Brian said, we're not in this perfect world, so you may have a weed outbreak where you say, okay, I have to use one of those. What's the best way to do it? Well, one thing that we'll see farmers do is back off on adjuvants a little bit. So rather than putting on a high load of a crop oil, maybe they back it off to just a 1% solution. Or maybe they'll switch from a crop oil or methylated seed oil down to a non-ionic surfactant instead. Now, non-ionic surfactants are going to have a little less burn on the plants, but here's the trade-off: you don't get quite the weed control. One other thing that I've seen that's really helped reduce burn, but it hasn't really cut back on weed control at all, is adding in some Solubor with products like Cobra. If we put 1.25 pounds of Solubor in per acre, that tends to reduce burn, especially in fields where you need some more boron. And looking at soil and plant tissue tests from across the continent this year, we're seeing a lot of fields that need some boron. So getting that out there and meeting your nutrient demands for your plant will help reduce the stress as well.
Well, once again, soybean flowering is going to be occurring soon. Whether you planted early or late doesn't matter. Soybean flowering is going to be happening. If you can, get your harsh herbicide sprayed before soybean flowering, and use caution when spraying any herbicide after flowering.
Well, one weed that you might be out after is our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to stop it coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our weed of the week is just an annual weed, so you wouldn't think it's that tough to control, but in many cases, it is. Our weed of the week is shattercane.
There's a farm operation that I know pretty well, not our operation, but another one that we work with, that actually planted shattercane as a cover crop and fought it for the next 20 years as a weed problem in their field. So that's why when you talk about cover crops, they're always concerned about, okay, how do you kill that cover crop if it happens to go to seed and you're gonna have to fight it now for years. So with shattercane, the biggest problem that we have about it is that it looks a lot like corn and it's tough to control in a corn crop. So if you've got corn in the rotation, you've got to be really diligent to make sure you stop shattercane from becoming a problem.
All right, in terms of control, I would look at in corn using one of the Group 15s, Harness, Surpass, Outlook Dual. That's not going to be perfect though. What you're going to have to follow with is one of the post-emerge grass killers. Now, we used to use Accent and Beacon years ago. The problem with some of the shattercane is it's ALS resistant. So if your ALS products don't work, then you'd want to look at Roundup or Liberty if you have those tolerant crops.
Well, in soybeans, it's kind of the same story. Roundup and Liberty are good options. And again, the ALS products like Pursuit and Raptor that we used to use post-emerge, they may or may not be very effective. However, you could use some of the grass control products like Clethodim, for example, will be pretty effective if you go to the higher rates. But always start with that pre of either Sonalan or Treflan. You've got to incorporate those, but they're pretty darn effective on shattercane.
Yeah, don't forget about Prowl. Prowl is the no-till product, so any of those yellows are pretty good. Turning to wheat, if it's non-ALS resistant shattercane, then start with Prepare. Otherwise, post-emerge, we're looking at the ACCA's family. That's the only other family we've got other than ALS. ALS, you'd be talking Everest, and ACCA's probably looking at Axial.
As Brian was talking about earlier, this weed resistance issue to certain families of herbicides is a big deal. Now, yes, we've got a lot of Roundup and Liberty tolerant crops now we can choose from. But when you think about it, if we can't use that ALS family, it does take quite a few options off the table, especially if you're a small grains grower. And we talked about, well, wow, look at all the ALS products that we'd like to use. We only have 2 families we're using for grass control there. So we've got to be really conscious of this in our crop rotation. Here again, you could also use some alternative methods of weed control besides herbicides and look at what you're doing with a cover crop. If you get a cover crop established and you can get that so the shattercane never sees the light of day, well, you can hold down shattercane just like you can a lot of other resistant weeds that are out there that we're facing. So that's something you can work on with your agronomist as to which cover crops could be planted to hit the timing of that shattercane emergence just right so it's shaded out and doesn't have a chance to compete. Our weed of the week again is shattercane. It used to be a much bigger problem when all our crops were conventional. Now that we've got some Roundup Ready crops and Liberty Link crops, we've got a couple of nice options to keep shattercane under control. It's all time for this week's weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Invisible, invasive, underestimated. Nematodes are stealing over 10% of yields, and current protection methods aren't enough. But a breakthrough seed treatment technology controls nematodes when they attack. Now offering NemaStrike technology. It provides broad spectrum control from the start and stays in the root zone as plants grow. Take back your bushels with NemaStrike technology. Strike where nematodes attack.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
At Estes Performance Concaves, we know how valuable your time is at harvest. That's why we designed the new XPR concave system. The XPR system is the #1 performance concave system on the market, surpassing the rest in both speed and efficiency, ensuring every last grain from your field gets into your tank. Plus, XPR concaves work for all row crops. No more changing concaves, meaning you have less downtime. Take back your bushels this harvest. Get Estes Performance Concaves in your combine today.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
With the success of the Case IH Steiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why Case IH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us, because Case IH offered the first 5-axle design to give you more power to the ground, less berming and compaction, all to help you be more productive. Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
By this time of the season, you're getting used to making a lot of little tweaks to your sprayer, depending on what product you're applying. In today's Iron Talk, I'll show you yet another small change that can make a big difference for you. In the middle of the growing season with just about any crop, it's time to protect your plants from harmful diseases. That often means a fungicide application. If you've been spraying herbicides like Roundup, XtendiMax, or Enlist 1, though, fungicides work completely different. There are two transport systems in plants called the xylem and the phloem. The xylem can move things only upward in the plant. The phloem moves things like nutrients and water both up and down in the plant. Fungicides, once they're inside the plant, only move in the xylem. One other important consideration is that fungicides can only protect the leaves and plant parts that are out at the time of application. With this in mind, there are some little changes that you need to make on your sprayer compared to if you're spraying Roundup. First of all, with fungicides, you should use more spray volume with ground rigs performing mid-season applications. You need volume to penetrate the crop canopy and cover these plants. Secondly, you need the correct spray tips to make medium-sized droplets to get the best spray coverage. Flat fans work well for this droplet size, and many farmers are seeing the best results with twin fans, especially for protecting vertical plant parts like wheat heads, for example. My favorite tips are the new 3D nozzles from Hypro. Just incredible coverage. Finally, your spray pressure should be fairly high to get penetration down through the crop canopy and to coat the plants. That's tough to do if you're running too fast with the ground rig, so slow down a little bit and do the job right. Spraying a fungicide is a lot different than spraying straight Roundup. Smaller droplet size, higher pressure, and higher water volumes help you achieve excellent coverage to get the job done right. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
Well, that's all the time we have today for our gnat-infested show. But before we go, we want to encourage you to attend the Ag PhD Field Day. It's a free event coming up on our farm the last Thursday in July. That's Thursday, July 25th. You can go to agphd.com to learn more.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.